Morning headlines with Glenn Robertson. The average household in Scotland is set to pay up to 54% more on their energy bills from the 1st of April. With prices likely to soar again in October, it is already estimated that up to 200,000 Scottish households will be plunged into fuel poverty. In other news, Scottish motorists are facing record high prices in the petrol market.
You see, what I just don't understand is, why is our electricity bills going up yet again? I mean, because of the cost of gas. We've got our own power for wind.
We've got turbines all over the place.
And all over the sea as well. And then there's hydro.
Well, there's plenty of water in Scotland.
And don't forget, we still have bags for our gas.
And oil. My mum's up to hide over the bills.
So why are our bills going up?
And they're right, of course. It's not just pub talk. Scotland can keep the lights on alone with renewables. And we produce way more than we actually need in gas and oil. But Westminster sets energy prices on the international price of gas and are controlled by international capital. They get the profits, Westminster get the revenues, and Scots pay the bills.
Good morning, delegates, and welcome to Alba Party's second national conference here at the Albert Halls in Stirling. How lovely to see you all, and welcome also to all of you watching us online via the live stream. Can I ask that you show your appreciation to our piper, Brian Kelly? Now, the Hall has asked me to read out a health and safety notice, which is as follows. There are no fire alarm tests scheduled for today, so if the fire alarm sounds, it is not a drill. The fire exits are clearly lit and signed, and there are 7 fire exits from the main hall and 3 from the lesser hall. If the fire alarm sounds, please exit the buildings through the fire exits calmly and carefully. Please follow the instructions of the venue staff at all times. The assembly point is through the black gates at the front of the car park. On the ground floor, the toilets are located out of the main hall front doors and turn left. Then follow the corridor and both ladies and gents are on your left-hand side. There's a disabled toilet located down the corridor and on the right. On the first floor, toilets are to the left as you come out of the lesser hall and then down the stairs to the right. There's a disabled toilet and lift just outside the lesser hall. The smoking area is outside beside the seats at the front of the building. And if there are any problems or if you need assistance with something venue-related, please contact the reception where there'll be someone who can help you. Thank you very much. Now, please remember to switch your mobile phones to silent, but of course to use them to post our social media hashtags, Alba22 and Alba for Independence. You can see them both behind me. And oh, by the way, these colours, saltire, blue and white, have always been our party colours. Now we have a full agenda which I'll present for your approval shortly. And can I remind you of our fringe events to include a canvas training session in here and an equality forum. And tomorrow, for those real feminists among us, there's a women's forum. Sandwiches, snacks, tea, coffee, etc. available to purchase in the bistro at the entrance hall. And of course, remember to purchase your Curry Ceilidh tickets for tonight. It promises to be much fun with much dancing, including by the party leadership, not to be missed. Yes. A wee reminder to complete speakers' cards, which you can get from our wonderful stewards. A round of applause for our stewards also, please. Now remember, if you propose a motion or an amendment, you've got 5 minutes to speak, and seconders and speakers get 3 minutes. Now, I will be strict with time, so when I look at you and tell you your time is up, none of this, oh, I'm just finishing up, Taz, or I'll be a few minutes. No, and none of this deliberately not making eye contact with me. When your time's up, your time's up. You know who you are. Now, and so do some of you. What a week it has been, and I promise to keep you updated over this weekend, particularly when Larry the Downing Street cat becomes the next Chancellor. 4 Chancellors in 4 months. I hear the Tories are making an advent calendar. But tell me this, what are Scotland's elected representatives, the guardians of our sovereignty, going to do about it? Say it's a disgrace? Yes, we know it is. Say the Tories are a shambles? Yes, we know they are. Say we want a general election? What for? Unless it's a plebiscite on independence, of course. How does that help Scotland? Can I remind you who demanded that Boris Johnson should go? How has that helped anyone in Scotland? It delivered us Liz Truss. Who will we get next? The point is, we don't ever get to choose. Conference right now, the only election we should be demanding, delivering and fighting is an independence referendum. So for those charged with the responsibility, get on with the job, or make way and let Alba do it. Now, the Supreme Court hearing and revelations have been quite something to behold this past week. But I'll tell you this, if I or any of our other candidates in the 2021 elections were elected as Alba MSPs on a supermajority, which we campaigned for last year, we would have presented an independence referendum bill on our first day in that Parliament. But more of the Supreme Court to come. First, let's take a look at this.
As Nigel Lawson posed for the traditional peaceful pre-budget pictures, he might have anticipated meeting critics in the Commons, but not the extraordinary scenes which awaited him. The Scottish Nationalist MP Alex Salmond started making his own speech, despite efforts by fellow MPs to make him sit down.
I name Mr. Alex Salmond.
And after the Deputy Speaker named him, Mr. Lawson had to wait so that MPs could vote to expel Mr. Salmond by 354 votes to 19. The MP said afterwards he was protesting about the poll tax.
I will not tolerate such behaviour. If you want to go out now, but if you stand again, I'll lord you out. Make your mind up. Either shut up and get out. Neil Hamby, I am now naming you and Kenny McCaskill to leave this chamber. Sergeant, deal with them. Deal with with them. Deal with them. Just sit down. Out! No. Sergeant at Arms, escort them out. Take them out, Sergeant. Let them out.
Kenny, Neil, you were just kicked out. What were you doing?
Well, it's a democratic outrage. We have a mandate for a referendum in Scotland. This is a Prime Minister who's distorting parliamentary democracy, who is denying Scotland its legitimate right to a referendum. And at the same time, we face that Scotland is an energy-rich country and over half our people are going to be facing fuel poverty. It's time Scotland had the right to determine its own future, rather than having a future determined by a handful of Tory MPs and then by a handful of Tory members, none of whom have been elected in Scotland, and indeed no Tory Prime Minister has been elected in Scotland in my lifetime.
Conference. Standing up for Scotland from 1998 to 2022 and doing it on purpose. Please welcome the great interveners, the great disruptors and Scotland's champions, Neil Hanvey, Ken McCaskill and our party leader Alex Salmond. Thank you, Conference. I will now hand over the chair to Kenny McCaskill. Thank you.
Well, I've got the very short notice. I'm just handing straight back to Tasmania to do the next part of our conference.
Thank you very much indeed, and I'm delighted to present the Conference Committee report. I have the privilege of chairing the Conferences Committee, and I'd like to first of all pay tribute to my fellow members of that committee, Eva Comrie, Corey Wilson, Josh Robertson, Gail Hendry, Jackie Bister, David Henry, Joan Savage, Heather McLean and Morgan Davies. We've met 3 times. We've met 3 times and selected 17 motions for today's agenda, including Alba's independent strategy, progressive tax policy, a public energy company and defence and security in an independent Scotland. In our agenda, we've reflected our commitment to working across the movement. Hence, the Yes Family Indie Rally tomorrow, with speakers from across our movement, from the SNP, Scottish Independence Convention, Scottish Independence Foundation, Scottish Socialist Party, Scottish Country Group, Salvo, Pensioners for Yes and various Yes groups. We're in it for all of us, Conference. Our agenda also reflects the court case of the moment, the Supreme Court hearing on the reference by the Lord Advocate, and later this morning we will have a panel discussion chaired by Ken McCaskill MP with Solicitor Advocate Gordon Dangerfield and that man who is referenced more than anyone else in the Supreme Court, Martin Keatings. I should say that Martin Keatings texted me at 7 a.m. this morning to tell me his, you know what's coming next, the 7:45 a.m. train from Tweedbank was cancelled. Suffice to say, my response was such that he is making his way here and will be here. Now, we have, as you would expect, put independence front and centre of our conference, and that's where it should always be. I therefore commend our interesting and exciting agenda to you all, and ask that conference approve it, so we can move to our straight on to our first motion, which is, of course, our strategy for independence. Thank you.
Well, I think there's no cards in, so without further ado, I think we can view that as accepted and pass the chair back.
Thank you very much indeed, Kenny. I'd now like to take this opportunity to introduce our General Secretary, Chris McElhenney.
Good morning, conference. It's great to see everyone as usual. I'm just about to finish, Chair. I'll be 2 minutes. So this is going to be a very quick report today. It's just to give you an update on the election of national office bearers, and I'm going to run through the individuals that were successfully elected as national office bearer in no particular order. So starting with Women's Convener, congratulations to Yvonne Ridley. Equalities Convener, congratulations to Eva Comrie. Organisation Convener, congratulations to Denise Finlay. Membership Support Convener, congratulations to Jackie Blister. And Local Government Convener, congratulations to Robert Slavin. Now, delegates attending conference vote to elect the ordinary members of the National Executive Committee. So for clarity, that's 4 male members and 4 female members. You should now have your email of your ballot in your inbox. If not, it should be with you shortly. If you have any issues with your ballot, if you could just see our volunteers at the front desk, they'll take a note of your name and then I'll catch up with you at some point. But hopefully everyone should have received that now. I look forward to seeing the results coming in, and we'll aim to announce them on Monday, because the ballot will stay open until 5 o'clock on Sunday to give people plenty of time to get their votes cast, and then we'll announce them to our members through social media and the website, etc. So I'll pass back on to you now, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. A reminder to get your cards in for our first motion. So can I take delegates please to motion number 1 on the agenda, Independence Strategy, to be proposed by Kenny McCaskill and seconded by Denise Finlay. Kenny McCaskill.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning, delegates. The Supreme Court case has been and gone. Many doubt the wisdom of it. Most doubt the likely success of it. But we are where we are. The accounting for it is for a different debate. If it's successful, then it's game on. If it's not, then it's certainly not game over. That is what this debate is all about. This is about how we make it game on for independence. It's not about wheesht anymore. It's not about now is not the time. It's not we've a plan, even a cunning plan. This is a strategy to demand our right and to deliver our nation's destiny. It's never been more required, but it's nothing new. It's not a wheeze by a Lord Advocate or a cunning political manoeuvre by a politician. Instead, it's an end to prevarication, postponement and being patronised. Scotland is a nation. It entered into a union, but on terms it negotiated, preserving its civic institutions. Those rights are being ignored because historic rights were preserved. So what do? Well, it's not stamp our feet or say one more mandate. There's no time for that. The need is now. The time is now. It's about parliamentary action, not supine acceptance of Westminster will. It's about popular action, marches, demonstrations, encouraging our people and making sure that we reject the imposition of a government that we didn't elect. It's about diplomatic action in international courts and making international friends and allies. It's about calling a convention of Scotland's elected representatives that can show our people and the world that it's not Westminster, but it's Scottish democracy that speaks for the people of Scotland and that will be leading the debate. That convention can and will resolve who has the right to decide Scotland's democratic future. Westminster, where there's never been a Scottish Tory majority in my lifetime, or Scotland's democratically elected representatives. They can decide who speaks for the Scottish people. And finally, as part of this strategy, if there is to be a plebiscite election, though as with much that's offered by this Scottish Government, it seems to be faltering and disappearing, then it must be on a united front basis of all the independence movement. Only Scotland United provides the breadth and can achieve the necessary mandate. But Conference, the status quo is not acceptable. It's not time for one more mandate or even one more general election. It's time for the Scottish people and their elected representatives to exert their legitimate, historic and democratic rights to self-determination. I move the motion.
Thank you very much, Kenny. I now invite Denise Finlay to second the motion, to be followed by Daniel Jack, who will speak in favour of the motion. Denise, welcome.
Hello, Conference. 18th of September 2014, we held Scotland's future in our hands. And if we could have seen that future, Scotland at the mercy of Tory governments, Westminster working for the benefit of the rich, Scots losing free movement and Scotland's place in the single market, the power grab on our Parliament, poverty, lower life expectancy, the poor getting ever poorer, working harder and longer for less, the narrowing of opportunity for all our fellow Scots, and a succession of Tory Prime Ministers, each more incompetent and more dangerous than the last. And through these 8 weary years, we have pleaded with our government to give us an opportunity to make a better choice. We've provided every mandate they asked for, but they have sat immobile, passive, accepting while Scotland suffers. In Westminster, the SNP MPs declare Scotland won't stand for this. Then they sit back down. With nearly 50 independent supporting MPs using Westminster's own rules, Westminster could be brought to a standstill, unable to function. And our MSPs could at least pass an independence referendum bill. We need a party in power that will fight for Scotland, marshal our people in popular demonstrations, a party that will convene a constitutional convention of our elected representatives, an embodiment of our sovereignty. Such a convention, given a democratic mandate, has the power to declare independence when we decide. Rather than going cap in hand to the United Kingdom Supreme Court and supinely promising to respect their decision, conceding defeat before the battle is joined, we should be preparing a case in international law, ready to present the legal underpinning of our democratic decisions to the world. We have the political strategy in Alba. We have the political will in Alba. We need political power. And that road to power will be hard. It will be a struggle. Nothing will be given. We have the might of the British establishment ranged against us, and sadly, that establishment seems to include our own government. But who has ever had it easy fighting for the freedom of their country? This is our cause. This is Scotland's cause. Scotland is more than ready, and it's long past time. And when we finally get the opportunity, we will vote for independence. We will once again mobilise the Scottish people, the Scots who have wanted independence and fought for independence all their lives, the new Scots seizing the opportunity to build a better nation, the Scots who will vote because there is something worth voting for, the Scottish working class who will once again fill the ballot boxes with their votes of hope. The mothers will march with their bairns to the polling stations, singing Flower of Scotland, and Scotland will once more be a proud independent nation. To every Scot now and every future Scot, we will gain the most precious gift, the greatest gift, a country of our own. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Denise. I now invite Daniel Jack, who's joined us from far afield, who will tell us when he gets here, to be followed by Sheila Adam, who will propose the remit back. Daniel. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, my name is Daniel Jack. I'm the convener of Alba International, and I live in Finland, so it's a slightly long journey.
Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, conference. What I'd like to do in supporting this motion is say a little about something that Kenny touched on in his opening remarks, and that is the reference to diplomatic activity. If, like me, you're of a certain generation, diplomatic activity conjures up images of those Ferrero Rocher adverts, you know, the ones where the ambassador spoils his guests with mountains of chocolate. Alas, the reality is more mundane, as I can attest, having been appointed in 2013 to the role of Scotland's most senior accredited diplomat to the United States, an appointment which was approved by Alex. Diplomatic activity involves forging and nurturing relationships with individuals and organisations which at first glance might appear unlikely bedfellows. Effective diplomacy takes time. It requires patience, perseverance, and pragmatism. You don't always get what you want, nor do you get it in the timescale in which you want it. But it is a worthwhile investment. And like most investments, although probably none under this current UK government, if developed and cultivated, they yield rewards further down the line. The reason why I want to draw this to your attention is that diplomatic activity is vital to the successful delivery of the independent strategy. Without it, we won't achieve our goal, because not only do we need the support of the people of Scotland, we also need to inform and win over friends in the international community. We need to lay the groundwork for this activity now. That is why we in Alba International, working with Alex and Tasmina, have already embarked on a programme of international outreach, connecting with think tanks, universities, key politicians, and multinational organisations, and indeed anyone who is willing to listen and who might end up supporting our cause. This activity will form the primary focus of all that we do in the months ahead. It is only by doing this now that we'll be in a position to deliver a second key component, the future campaign for international recognition. The two are inextricably linked. I would like to make one final but important point. In order for this work to succeed, and we firmly believe that it will succeed, we in Alba International need to be at the table where decisions are made. This work is integral to us achieving success. It's not an add-on. That's why I am standing for election to the NEC and why I'm shamelessly asking you to consider voting for me in order to make this happen. Thank you very much. Please support the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Daniel. I'd now like to invite Sheila Adam to propose the remit back to be seconded by Terry Housen. And Terry, I think you said you've got an issue with your leg. We've got a lectern down here with a handheld mic. So, first of all, Sheila Adam. Okay, thank you very much, Sheila. So Sheila's just asking it rather than her speak. She's nominating someone to take her place. Sarah, I'm sure that's fine with conference. Yes, sure. So to propose the remit back, I invite Sarah Sawyers.
Good morning, conference. Has anyone ever seen the movie Groundhog Day? Well, here I am again. So, in March, I very reluctantly stood up to submit a remit back for a really excellent motion. And that remit back fell narrowly, and a promise was made to conference by Neil Hanvey that if conference voted against the remit back, a motion on the claim of right would come before the main conference in October. And because he said, if you remember, that this issue needed specific and real time and attention given to it. I came here today expecting to support, or last night I expected to support, a motion that mentions the sovereignty of the Scottish people and the claim of right. Instead, what I find myself here doing is saying, if conference passes this motion, we are tied to a policy that puts Scottish popular sovereignty into the same category as Westminster sovereignty, and I'll tell you why. We've got a quote here from the Scottish Constitutional Convention: "The people of Scotland are sovereign and have the right to determine the form of government best suited to their needs." The chair of that convention was Canon Kenyon Wright. He also said in 2014 that he believed that most of those who signed the 1988 Claim of Right did not understand what they had signed. Because, he said, either the Parliament is sovereign or the people. It cannot be both. And whether the sovereignty that our representatives have is a kind of custodianship that is moved up from the people to the representatives, or it comes from the monarch down, what you end up with is something that certainly didn't exist in the Scottish Constitution. What that gives us is this. Every 5 years or so, we go to the polls. At that moment, we're sovereign. After we voted, those we have represented are now the custodians of our sovereignty. Just how accountable has that system shown to make our politicians? How does that reflect on a Scottish constitution that says that sovereignty of the people is sovereignty over the monarch, over the government, over the parliament, and over the courts, and if the people are betrayed by those to whom they have lent their power, they have the right not to vote for another one and hope they're going to be a bit better. The right to sack them. Right? And with that right comes the mechanism, because without a mechanism to exercise your rights are meaningless. So what Salvo is, or was hoping for, is that party by party, especially those that most of us, the one most of us belong to, would get behind the people. Behind the people instead of asking the people just to get behind them. We'll do the job, you do the leafleting, you do the marching. There's nothing that you can do if you're not an elected representative. That is not Scottish constitutional law. And it's a dangerous thing to say, oh yes, in nice words, pretty words, our representatives are the custodians of that sovereignty, but it means the exact same thing as Westminster parliamentary sovereignty, and it's dangerous. I don't have time, as I should have done with a motion on this subject, to tell you why it's also unrealistic, because we'll never get the SNP or any other party to the table. I will ask you not to support a motion that will tie Alba to the idea of parliamentary and representative sovereignty. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Conference. Can I... For the benefit of our Conference and those who take great interest in the matters of our party constitution and the running of the Conference Committee, any motion, of course, can be brought forward to Conference to be discussed and debated by the Conference Committee before it makes the agenda. But for that to happen, it has to be submitted timelessly. And second of all, if anyone wishes to amend a motion, it has to be submitted in the proper form as an amendment. And the final point I'd make in terms of the motion, I appreciate everything that Sarah said, just as guidance to Conference, is point number 3 on the motion makes specific reference to what should be done relative to the international case. This is a plan of action that is detailed in the independent strategy. and specific reference to those of you who are looking at it is made to the claim of right in paragraph number 3. Now, I'd like to invite the seconder of the motion, who I think is still Terry. Welcome, Terry. Are you going to come up? You're going to come up? Oh, okay. All right. So that's okay. I'm sure Conference is absolutely happy that Sheila seconded the motion. 2 seconds. Second remit back, I beg your pardon. Terry, would you like to speak?
Terry was going to second me.
Yeah, I just want to have I can't really have a conversation. I just want to be clear. You're seconding the remit back. I just want to know if separately Terry would like to speak.
I don't think there's a need.
That's fine. Thank you very much. Thank you indeed, delegates. Thanks for your patience. Welcome.
Thanks. Thanks, Conference. Sorry, we don't mean to be unorthodox about the way we present this. I actually did present amendments to the NEC independence strategy, and it was seconded by the Highland Lacu, and it had the support, it was seconded also by Terry, and it had the support of Sarah. So, Sarah has explained that the people are sovereign. Basically, we're feeling the politicians have had 300 years. It isn't sorted yet. We've got a lot just now that are not doing anything, as we've said many times. So, and we have, as a nation, voted and given them a remit since 2011, if you're being generous, even before that, and they've had a stomping Westminster majority since 2015 and have done nothing with it. So to answer what Taz was requesting, I'll put it in the form of amendments, but it's an amendment. These are amendments that would result, I think, in a remit back. So the people, not politicians, have authority in this land. The people, therefore, not a political convention, which I also feel is unrealistic because we ain't going to get the agreement of the SNP to come along with us on that. So the people, not a political convention, will lead Scotland's case internationally. So my amendments, as presented when they were asked for, is that Alba MPs absent themselves with immediate effect from Westminster, and that they commit, along with the whole of the Alba Party, to the Scottish people by working to raise awareness of the Treaty of Union breaches by Westminster, which, as we all know, are long and heartbreaking. Redress Westminster's failure to respect the will of Scotland to end the Union. It's been said many times that Wilson, Thatcher and many other UK Prime Ministers said that if Scotland ever returned by majority vote at a UK election, a majority of MPs for an independence party, that they would honour Scotland's will to end the Union. They've had that since 2015. They haven't honoured it. They haven't been pushed. So the other thing we need to be doing is getting the SNP to do their duty by the people. They were elected to end this union. People have been voting patiently since 2011 for independence by voting for SNP. And tell the Scots, Alba Party, tell the Scots about the significance of the claim of right for independence, encouraging folk to join Salvo and the National Liberation Movement that Neil spoke about. And finally, sorry, I will finish. And also, what I would ask of this party is to cooperate with. It's not our place to lead, but to cooperate with those people who are already working on and leading the international case for Scotland's right of self-determination. That case will be made in the name of the modern equivalent of our ancient Convention of the Estates, which is to say, the body that oversees politics, law and society in Scotland. Conference, please support the remit back with those amendments. Thank you,
Thank you very much indeed, Sheila. Thanks so much, Terry. I'd now like to invite Neil Hanvey to speak in favour of the motion, and our final speaker to speak in favour of the motion will be Alex Salmond. Neil Hanvey.
Good morning, Conference, and thanks for that welcome. Our history is obviously important, and it forms a vital part of the political activity that we do, from the declaration of Arbroath through to the claim of right, and the historic foundation of the union that we now exist in. So the Alien Act of 1705 threatened Scotland effectively with economic sanctions if we did not settle the question of royal succession or enter into negotiations for that union. And unfortunately, the Scottish Parliament chose to debate that and ratified that treaty. The treaty was met, as you will no doubt be aware, with vociferous opposition across Scotland, both inside and outside the parliamentary chamber. But given the threats and the enticements, a majority in the Scottish Parliament were persuaded to enter into the union. Crowds gathered in Scotland at that time to burn the Articles of Union in Dumfries and Stirling, and manifestos were published against the union. The trades organised marches in Glasgow, and the parishes in the south of Scotland got the militia together to defend the Kingdom of Union. But a lack of nerve and leadership from Scotland's parliamentarians failed to resist. It is absolutely indisputable this was no consensual union. But however, we exist under a union of the crowns and a political union. The claim of right still has relevance today, as we saw recently when King Charles took the throne. And Scotland, I think it's important to note, is one of the few countries, in fact, I think one of the only democracies, that's common law does not operate under the Magna Carta, but it operates under the claim of right. And all of this is important. History is important. But the reality is, in politics and today, it is a backdrop to the political arguments that we make and the political voice that we assert within the wider political discourse in advancing Scotland's independence. We are a political party. Politics is our purpose. Now, I have a good relationship with Sarah. I'm a member of Salvo, and I respect the work that they do, just as I do with the Scottish Sovereignty Research Group. But that backdrop is of value. It is not a magic bullet. It is not an immediate political remedy. It is part of the argument. What's more important is that we are able to demonstrate our resolve, demonstrate our action, and our preparation for independence is absolutely vital. So we must be ready to capture the initiative and every opportunity that presents itself to us, because this is a prize that's not for any one individual or any one political party. This is about the nation of Scotland, and we must use every opportunity, every potential route to secure that independence. We cannot, for lack of a better word, put all of our eggs in one basket. We need to have the maximum repertoire in our maximum repertoire available in our political campaigning. And so, whilst I understand the passion that Sarah has for the arguments that she's researched, we exist in a political world, and we cannot divorce ourselves from that. We cannot put all of our eggs in one basket and silence ourselves politically. So I support the motion. I support our energy and commitment to fighting for independence. So please support the motion.
Thank you. Thank you, Neil. I now invite Alex Salmond to speak against the remit back. Alex Salmond.
Delegates, I'm going to do 700 years of Scottish history in a minute or two, but I thought I would start with some of my own history, because actually you saw it earlier on today. In March 1988, when I stood up in the House of Commons to challenge Nigel Lawson's budget on the issue of the sovereignty of the people and why Westminster could not impose a poll tax on Scotland, taxation specifically forbade by the Treaty of Union, incidentally, which is why my father wouldn't pay his poll tax, although he'd been a law-abiding civil servant for most of his days. The sort of guy, if he dropped his cigarette packet, would have gone back and put it in the bucket, wouldn't pay his poll tax because it broke the Treaty of Union. So when I had 649 MPs of the Labour, Tory parties baying at me, and I'm not sure my two colleagues were entirely supportive of my actions initially, I did it to uphold the sovereignty of the Scottish people. That's why I did it. When Neil Hanvey and Kenny McCaskill gave the Speaker of the House of Commons apoplexy a few weeks ago, I thought if it had gone any more, they'd be looking for a new Speaker as well as a new Chancellor. They did it to uphold the sovereignty of the Scottish people. So I'll give you a wee secret, delegates. I drafted this motion for the National Executive Committee. And the idea that I would draft a motion which didn't explicitly state the claim of right and the sovereignty of the Scottish people is ridiculous. So all I would ask you to do is read the motion. And just in case you don't have it immediately available on your iPad, I'll read it for you. Conference notes the golden thread of Scottish history, the constitutional tradition of the sovereignty of the people to determine whatever government best suits our needs. Conference notes that Scotland's claim of right, asserted by the community of the realm through history, from the 14th century to the cross-party agreement in the 1980s, is supported by international law and the right of self-determination and does not require the permission of the UK Parliament or indeed the UK Supreme Court to be brought into effect. That's what the motion says. Now, I, like Neil Hanvey, have great respect for the work of Salvo and Sarah and all the people who are enthusiastically campaigning on it. I'll happily join that campaign. But that is a campaign group who are looking at Scottish history and looking for ways forward, and Alba will give them maximum support. But Alba is a political party. Our job is to win elections. It's going to be a sair fight, but we've got to win elections. In 1320, when the community of the realm of Scotland addressed a letter of support to Pope John in Avignon in support of the greatest king in Scottish history, good King Robert, you would think that everything in that letter was supportive of Robert the Bruce. No. What it says is he is the defender of our rights, but if he ever is to subvert our rights, we'll drive him from us and get another king, because we shall never subject ourselves to the domination of the English. That's what the Declaration of Arbroath says. Note, it doesn't say we'll have no king, no parliament, no prime minister, no first minister. It says we'll get another one. And for those who say, what do we do if SNP MPs won't uphold the sovereignty of the people, won't uphold the claim of right? The answer's quite simple. We remove them with Alba MPs or those from another party who will do. So I'm asking you, Conference, as the young Member of Parliament who stood up and baited Lawson and Thatcher in 1988, as a First Minister who required one mandate to secure the right of people to vote in a referendum, do not start our conference by rejecting a strategy which upholds the fundamental rights of Scotland, our claim of right and our sovereignty.
I'd now like to invite Kenny McCaskill to sum up. Kenny.
Well, it's difficult to follow that. But I think what I would like to do is just to address, sadly, why I think we have to oppose the remit back. This is not, and has been, it seems almost dancing on the head of a pin. Motions are by nature a skeleton that parties flesh out, because you have to have the ability to depart for circumstance, but it lays down the clear criteria. It seems to me that the points being made, the concerns that people have, are misfounded. First of all, there was a claim about the claim of right. Well, in the third paragraph, Conference notes that Scotland's claim of right asserted by the community of the realm through history, as articulated by our party leader, it is in there. And the executive, every member of this party, will be able to flesh it out and to react as necessary and when appropriate. And there's the talk about politicians and the sovereignty of the people. Can you move on to the second page of the document where it says, item 2, the recognition by the elected MSPs and MPs of Scotland that they are the custodians of Scottish sovereignty. That's for the Convention. But it goes on to say, to create the political circumstances which will allow Scotland's right of self-determination to be expressed next year. The right of the Scottish people, not that only of those elected MSPs or MPs. This is about laying out a strategy. It accepts the doubts that people have that it's not, that the reference to the claim of right isn't made. It is in there. It has doubts about sovereignty. We make sure that it's the people of Scotland that are sovereign. If I don't stand up for Alba in Parliament, then I will be deselected by Alba Lacu in East Lothian. That's how it's always been, and that's how it will remain. But we are in danger of dancing on the head of the pin. This is the start of our convention. This is the start of a campaign. We've had enough of seeing people standing in court debating legal finalities, legal niceties. What we need to do is to get out on the streets of Scotland in by-elections, to get out into the civic squares in Scotland explaining that we shouldn't be this way, that the people of Scotland have a historic right to their own independence, and that the political representatives must see that, and ultimately the people of Scotland will decide their own future based on that history through the convention called by the elected representatives, and working, as David Jack said, with all those friends that we have in the international world, and using not just the Supreme Court, but the international courts to free our country.
Thank you, delegates. We'll now take a vote on our first motion on independent strategy. Well, you're all delegates, which is why you're here, so you'll have you're able to vote. We're going to start first in relation to the remit back. All those in favour of the remit back, please raise their cards. All those against? Thank you. All those that remit back falls. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your cards. All those against? The motion is passed by acclaim. Thank you very much indeed, Conference. While Christopher McElhenney practices his steps across the stage, you will have noticed, I don't quite know what he's doing, you'll have noticed, however, that I've missed something, which was in his report, so basically he's missed it, but I've reminded him he needs to include it, which is the announcement of our by-election candidates in the upcoming by-election. So with that, please welcome our General Secretary, Chris McElhenney.
Thank you, Conference, and well done to the Chair. There was a trap I set to see if you were paying attention. I think that the party leader there articulated very well that the point of political parties is to contest elections, and by contesting elections we'll build support for Alba, and by building support for Alba we'll force the Scottish Government and we'll force Westminster to bend to our will and deliver us our independence. So I'm really pleased, Conference, to announce that there are two upcoming by-elections, one in Glasgow and one in West Lothian, and the Alba Party will be contesting both of those by-elections. Now, we've got two candidates. Are they both in the hall? Put your hands up. Yep, stand up. Okay, thanks very much, everyone. That's for two candidates. We've got Kirsty from Glasgow, Debbie from West Lothian. And it's very important that... Sorry?
I'd like to see them.
Oh, the Chair would like you to come up to the stage. Yes. Now, I know we've got a packed lunch, but there's going to be a very important session at lunchtime on our new canvassing tool, so it's important that you get along to that, because I'll be hoping that everyone in this hall will be getting themselves out of West Lothian and Glasgow to get round the doors and knock them, so that we can boost the vote for these two magnificent candidates, and we can make sure that the Alba vote continues to rise. And I'm just going to invite them now to say a few words to conference.
First of all, Kirsty, Lynn Ward, Glasgow. Welcome, Kirsty.
Hello, conference. I wasn't prepared for this. Usually when I'm speaking publicly, I'm arguing with other people. So it's nice to see fellow independent supporters and Alba members. So thank you. I'm standing in the Lynn Ward in Glasgow. Glasgow born and bred. This is a holiday for me to come to Stirling. Glasgow City Council has been run into the ground, if anybody here is from Glasgow. We have employees of Glasgow City Council using food banks. It's a mess, and we have an SNP-run council who are constantly ignoring the working class people of Glasgow, and we need a voice in there that's going to challenge them at every turn. They're continuing with their intrusive sex surveys in school, they're continuing with their cuts to public services, and we need a voice in the council that's going to tell them where to go. So on that note, thank you.
Thank you, Kirsty. Now, Debbie, your ward is, I know, I'm determined to get this right, Broxburn, Uphull and Winchborough. Yes?
Excellent.
Yay.
Thank you, Taz. Conference, it's a huge privilege to be selected as the candidate for Broxburn, Uphull and Winchborough by-election. I'm a lifelong independent supporter, but this is the first time I've ever put myself forward as a candidate. Until I joined Alba last year, I felt politically homeless for several years. Joining this party has given me renewed purpose and a renewed optimism that Scotland will become an independent nation. There's never been a more important time to stand up for Scotland, and the events of last week have just proved that. We're living through the turbulence of an energy crisis, soaring cost of living, and the undermining of women's rights. Scotland communities need strong and credible Alba representatives more than ever now. We're blessed to have an incredible Alba team in West Lothian, and this by-election represents an opportunity for everyone in our party to showcase our positive and ambitious vision for the people of Scotland. To that end, I'd encourage you all to join our campaign in West Lothian and look forward to seeing you on the campaign trail. Thank you.
And it seems like...
Thanks very much, everyone. Just a little fact. You might have seen a poll that we're on 4% now. So have a wee look at history. It took the SNP 30 years to get to 4%, and we've done it in 18 months. So let's see how far we can take it in these two by-elections, conference.
Sounds like an opportune moment for a campaign photograph, so here we go. Thank you very much indeed. And before we move to our next motion, well done and good luck. We're all going to come and support you. Wonderful women in your campaign. Thank you. Debbie and Kirsty, thank you. Before we move to our next motion, I am delighted to say, because I've been giving a running update as to where he is, Martin Keatings is in the house and on the balcony. We'll hear from Martin shortly. Now we're going to move to our next motion on the agenda, motion number 2, a progressive tax policy for Scotland, to be proposed by Chris McElhenny and seconded by Alan Petrie. Chris McElhenny.
hobble back along again. This motion's from Inverclyde Lacoo, and my father was supposed to propose it, but unfortunately he took on well yesterday and he's unable to come to conference, so he asked me to move it for him. He promises me he had a magnificent speech written for it. Unfortunately, he never gave it to me, so we'll just need to put up with this. But I think this is a really clever motion. And it shows how much we've matured as a political party in such a short amount of time, because if you look at the chaos in Westminster, one of the key drivers of that chaos was the ridiculous decision of the ex-Chancellor to scrap the top rate of income tax and have the very poorest people in society pay for a tax break for the rich. It was completely absurd, and I'm for one, I'm absolutely delighted to see that the Chancellor's gone. But the reality for Scotland is, just like Boris Johnson left and he's been replaced by Liz Truss, one Chancellor goes, another comes. Scotland still doesn't have any choice in this. So that's why, we've got Neil and Kenny. For as long as Scotland is stuck, handcuffed to Westminster, they'll demand more progressive, radical policies for Scotland. But in the here and now, the Scottish Parliament does have tax-raising powers. Now, from 1999 to 2016, we had fought for a parliament that had the tax-raising powers during that period. But it was a bit of a con, because although we had tax-raising powers in that period, if you wanted to raise the upper rate of income tax by 3 pence, you had to raise the lower rate of income tax by 3 pence, and vice versa. So in reality, it was a system that couldn't really be implemented and used. But then, from the Smith Commission, we've got new powers. And unfortunately, part of the debate about taxation in Britain, the Tories don't want to talk about, ever increasing tax, because then they would be asked to justify what they spend their money on. X amount of billion in wasted test and trace contracts, £200 billion in weapons of mass destruction. So they're never going to have a debate about let's pay more tax so that we can have public services that are fit for purpose, so that we can fund and afford pay rises for nurses and our frontline workers, that we were happy to stand and knock pans outside of our houses and clap hands for them every Thursday night. But it seems pretty slow at the moment for the Scottish Government to reward them with the pay rise that they deserve. In conference, they certainly deserve it. So this is a policy that, until we get independence, we can make radical, transformative change in Scotland by ensuring that the people with the broadest shoulders take a greater burden of taxation in our society, so that we can have more money to invest in public services. We can have more money to make sure trains turn up on time and the workers get the fair pay rise. We can have more money to make sure that you're not sitting in a hospital accident in emergency for 12 hours if you're lucky that an ambulance has turned up in time to collect you. That's why, conference, progressive, radical taxation is important. And I think this motion positions us as the most progressive party in the whole UK when it comes to tax. Because what is the debate in Westminster, Neil Kenny? It's a debate about the race to the bottom. It's not a debate that the Labour Party, the loyal opposition in that place, are saying, well, we should be paying more tax if we've got more money. The debate's about how much should it be reduced? How much more money should millionaires be allowed to take home at the expense of hard-working people? Whereas in Scotland, our Parliament this year, in this upcoming budget, John Swinney, who I believe is still the temporary caretaker, can make a different decision. They can decide that, why do we have a set of tax brackets that mirror Westminster's and tinker at the edges, a penny here and a penny there, whereas we can have a new tax system that makes sure that higher earners pay a much greater burden to society, because I think they owe that to society, because the wages that people, the only people, conference, in case we're scaring the horses, the only people we're talking about paying more tax are people that earn over £70,000 a year. We're not talking about people, nurses and teachers, classroom assistants, janitors, bin men, hard-working frontline workers. We're not talking about them paying more in tax, because they certainly pay enough in tax and they pay enough through their hard work for society as it is. We're talking about people earning over 70 grand paying a wee bit more in tax. We're talking about people earning over 80 grand paying an even wee bit more in tax. We're talking about people over £100,000 paying a lot more in tax, and we're talking about people earning over £150,000 paying a 50p top rate, something that used to be an argument in UK politics, but that argument's now gone because we're currently living in a race to the bottom. And you know, Conference, I'm led to believe with good authority that there are a lot of rats in Westminster. But you know, we're no rats. This isn't a rat race that Scotland should be part of. The great Jimmy Reid once said that. We should reject the Westminster system of a race to the bottom, cuts to public services, forcing workers to go on strike, denying them the right to go on strike. We should create in Scotland a progressive system that makes sure we can fund public services, so as England and the Westminster Tories cut away at their NHS, as they force workers on to strike, we should have public services that we can be proud of. And to do that, we need to be willing to stand up and pay for them. The richest with the broadest shoulders have to pay their fair share. In Conference, that's why I'm asking you today to support this motion, to support Alba having the most progressive tax policy in the entire UK. Thank you.
I now invite Alan Peachy from Dundee to second the motion, to be followed by Gordon Miller from International Alba for the remit back. Alan Peachy.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just send best wishes to Jackie Anderson as well, who took unwell on Thursday. Jackie's a member of the equality team. She should have been at conference today. So take it easy, Jackie, and we'll welcome you back when you're fit. Good morning, Conference. I have the pleasure of seconding this great motion on progressive taxation. Some people may ask, why do we need this policy? My answer is quite simple. The regressive tax policy of the Union has failed for decades. Remember when Labour's saviour of the Union, Gordon Brown, doubled the tax from 10 pence to 20 pence for the lowest paid in the country? That policy was to pay out the sweeteners to the well-off and the illegal war in Iraq. Then just a few weeks ago, we had the untrustable one, cut the tax for higher earners. That policy nearly bankrupted the UK pensions fund that is already the lowest in the world. Yet the union has not saved our pensions as they claimed in 2014. I think, however, we should give credit where credit is due, because the SNP government did start the ball rolling, changing the Scottish taxation to a more progressive system than that of Westminster. However, they did not go far enough. Like too many governments in the past, they buckled when the rich threatened to leave. Well, they can eat their caviar and sup their champagne and sing God Save the King, but the sovereign Scots in this room are not so easily crushed and do not bow to greed. I must add that the majority of those earning more are in favour of paying more tax because they know they can afford it. There's just a few of the greed ones out there. So, Conference, we are living in the year 2022, yet there are children being treated for rickets because they do not have a healthy diet. There are others right now in Scottish hospitals throughout the country who are suffering from malnutrition. This is year 2022, and that is happening under this union because of regressive taxation. We must make those who can afford to pay more tax to help our children and put our country first. This winter, we will also see more elderly die from hypothermia because they cannot heat their homes. So let us send this message to those higher earners who are threatening to leave the country if they have to pay more tax to give us a fair, prosperous and caring nation. Don't threaten to leave. Just leave and don't let the door hit you on the way out. Your greed is not welcome in our country. Let's put the need of our citizens before the greed of the elite. Please support the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan. I'd now like to invite Gordon Miller for the remit back. Gordon has a seconder, which is in order for the remit back, Maggie Chetty. Maggie, would you like to speak? You're welcome to speak if you wish. Where are you?
She's done.
Would you like to speak? So is Conference happy that we accept the seconder from the floor? Yes, thank you very much. Gordon, welcome.
Okay. Hello. Good morning, Conference. I've had 40 years' experience in taxation. I started off as an inspector, I've been a tax advisor for the Big Six, and I now run my own small accountancy practice. My problem with this is not that I'm against it at all. It's simply it doesn't do what it says. It is not bolder and more progressive. It is simply tinkering at the edges of the existing rates and bands. It's not really clear what the proposal wants to achieve or if it's been costed or anything. And as a tax professional, it looks to me unnecessarily complicated for very little benefit. I mean, what's the point of a 1% difference between the starter rate and the basic rate? Likewise, why split the higher rate? If you were going to do something that was really bold and progressive, you would have maybe a 10% starter rate. You'd extend the basic rate band to keep ordinary people out of the higher rate. You could have a higher rate of 40% to maybe 110,000, and then a 45% to 175,000. And over 175,000, why not 55? There are other European countries that have 55%. And people have jobs, they have property, they have roots. They will not leave regardless of what they say if you have a 55% tax rate for people at the very top. So I would ask you not to vote for this because it sounds the sort of thing that we should be voting for. I mean, it is the sort of thing that we should be voting for. But in its current form, it just doesn't achieve anything. It could be much, much better, but it needs more thought than has been given to it so far. And for that reason, I'd ask you to vote for the remit back. I'm not a big fan of sort of feel-good resolutions if they can't actually achieve anything. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gordon. There's no more cards in, so I'd like to invite Chris to sum up. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. I agree wholeheartedly with the mover of the remit back. This is the sort of motion that we should be approving at our Alba Party Conference. It's about broad principles. We're not in government conference yet. So, if we approve a policy today, the Scottish Government don't implement a new tax policy tomorrow. But what we can do is we can start to define and mould the sort of party that we're going to grow into in the future. And quite clearly, by approving this motion, we're sending a clear message that we're not going to be a race to the bottom party. We're going to be a party that stands behind the working class people of Scotland. We're going to be a party that raises more money for public services, for better public services, for better pay in the public sector. We're going to be a political party that people look to as a radical alternative for independent supporters to make sure they don't turn back to the Tory party or the Labour Party because they don't see a government in Edinburgh that's working for them. And just one technical point, the remit back could have submitted an amendment to, amend some of the figures that were mentioned, but what you refer to is complicated. That's the current system. The numbers in there in terms of starter rate and basic rate, that's what people pay at the moment. That's what we pay at the moment in Scotland. What this policy is doing is saying that the people that are in the upper band, they should be paying more. They should be taking their fair share of the pain that's coming to make sure that when we need to go to the hospital or when we need to go to the doctor, there's somebody there being paid to be on the other end conference. So that's the message that we would send out to our conference today, that we are a party that is on the side of working people. Please reject the remit back and please support the motion.
Thank you very much indeed, Chris. So we have another vote. Isn't this exciting? So if you can raise your cards as I ask you. First of all, we're going to vote on the remit back. This is motion number 2, a progressive tax policy for Scotland. All those in favour of the remit back, please raise your cards. All those against, please raise your cards. The remit back therefore falls. All those in favour of the motion, please raise your cards. All those against. The motion passes by acclaim. Thank you very much indeed. Actually, I should say overwhelmingly, which is the correct terminology for that. Thank you very much indeed, conference. We now move to our next motion, which is a public energy company. Motion number 3 to be proposed by Robert Reid and seconded by David Maitland. I'm just going to remind these young gentlemen as they approach to speak that despite the fact that your name is on the agenda to speak, you are still required to submit a speaker's card, but we'll let it slide. Welcome Robert Reid to propose the motion.
quite shocking. I didn't know that, considering I'm up here all the time at every conference. But I reassure you, this is the one and only time I'm speaking today. But I'm delighted to be proposing this very important motion today. As we all know, the Tory cost of living crisis has been felt in every village, town and city across this great energy-rich nation. This crisis is at the forefront of everyone's minds. For this reason, I think it's important to remind everyone of the words of the Better Together campaign. They tweeted in the run-up to the 2014 referendum, "Lower energy bills for Scotland than if we leave the United Kingdom. Read more here," followed by a link. Now, it's to my great sadness that the page that the link directed you to no longer exists. I guess we'll never know the detailed, thought-provoking and evidential basis that allowed them to make such a claim. We as a party understand how crucial this issue is for the Scottish people and a future independent Scotland. Hence why this subject matter has featured so prominently at previous party conferences, and why at our last conference we instructed the Scottish Government to establish a publicly owned energy company, something this motion today reasserts. I'm not sure about you all, but I hope you were as dismayed as I was at the abysmal, borderline criminal Scotland auction conducted by the Scottish Government last year. Now, selling off Scotland's resources on the cheap is something we've become accustomed to from Tory governments we never voted for. But this, from a Scottish nationalist government, is truly unforgivable. This motion again reasserts our commitment to a public share in our offshore wind wealth, so that Scots can finally benefit from the abundance of resources we have at our fingertips. Now, we are all well versed in the arguments about Scotland's energy potential and the staggering offshore wind production in our great country. Our nation, that is supposedly too wee, too poor, too stupid to be an independent nation, has an estimated 25% of Europe's offshore wind resources and 90% of the UK's hydropower production. Is it any wonder why they're so desperate to keep a hold of us? These stats are extremely impressive. What I find most shocking is the stark difference that exists between Scotland and England in the ways we produce our electricity. As we know, Scotland produces near 100% net of its electricity from renewable sources. Now, these figures couldn't be more different for England. 60% of England's electricity comes from natural gas, and in the southeast of England in particular, that figure rises to 87%. Now, it's often said that Scotland and England are heading in diametrically opposed directions politically, but it's also true to say for our energy production. These figures clearly demonstrate that Scotland does not have a dependence on natural gas to keep the lights on. Yet our bills are increasing at an alarming rate because Westminster sets the price on the international price of gas. Our resources are not controlled by the people. They are controlled by international capital. They get the profits, Westminster gets the revenue, and we Scots are left to pay the bills. This simply cannot continue. Now, most Scots don't understand this sad reality. They see their bills rising and are asking why. Voting in favour of this motion will instruct the NEC to mount a campaign that illustrates this injustice and the stark contrast between the electricity bills of an independent Scotland with public provision in contrast to the unaffordable impositions of the present privatised UK system. Now, to date, there's been a complete failure to link this disastrous Tory cost of living crisis with the urgent necessity of independence. This fault lies squarely at the door of the SNP leadership and their merry band of MPs who have been too preoccupied with trying to thwart England's democratically expressed right to leave the EU, trying to reform the unreformable Westminster system, or spending too much time in court defending dangerous organisations such as mermaids. Indeed, it's a far cry from scaring the horses down south. This issue around energy will be vital in any future independence referendum, and we cannot allow the argument to be lost because of the SNP so far have neglected their responsibility to link this issue to independence. We as a party must be there to do right by the Scottish people and fill that void that has been left. We cannot let the argument be lost as a result of SNP incompetence. We know Scotland can do better than this. Vote for this motion today so we can show the people, Scottish people, the exact same. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed to Robert Reid. I'd now like to invite David Maitland to second the motion. Welcome, David, to be followed by Debbie Ewan.
Thank you very much. Well, good morning, brothers and sisters. At our conferences this time last year and again in March this year, Alba took the energy lead by introducing the World Energy Organization, the World Energy Capital, and the world-leading public energy company. And they were listening, because Labour has already copied our concept, or so the headlines would have us believe. Imitation is the best form of flattery, and according to the media, Alba's Scottish Public Energy has become Labour's Great British Energy. But their version falls drastically short of our vision. In contrast to Alba, and also now the TUC's proposal to establish public ownership within the customer-orientated parts of the energy system, GBE has no way of directly affecting bills, because it leaves in place the vast majority of Margaret Thatcher's energy privatisations. So it will be impossible to deliver savings for the public. Beneath the surface of Labour's fake news GBE, they will invest alongside the private sector. So tomorrow looks the same as today under Labour, because 29% of our bills will still be directly paying all the profits and dividends of energy supply and distribution companies. There are many, but just one example in France. Publicly owned EDF kept energy bill rises to 4% in April, while our prices soared by 54%. So with ever-increasing bundles of our cash being taken from our personal bank accounts and pumped into record energy company profits, how encouraged we all were to hear that public ownership was back in the Labour vocabulary, only to find out that behind the facade, GBE is a tragic, wasted opportunity. It falls woefully short of the Alba commitment for a genuine, 100% public-owned energy company. Conference, Thatcher promised us back in 1986 that we will still own our energy companies through shares. Today, here in 2022, Scottish Power is 100% Spanish-owned, with BlackRock and the Qatari Investment Authority as its major shareholders. SSE is owned by OVO, who have BlackRock and Invesco as its two major shareholders. Scotland won nature's lottery with organic fossil fuels under the North Sea and Europe's biggest potential for wind and hydropower surrounding our coastlines. But these Tory monopolies and Labour's GBE will always ensure that shareholders around the world always exploit and profiteer from our resources and our misery. The impending destruction of trusts and inevitable demise of the Tories will gift Labour the UK Parliament by default. So in seconding this motion, I have a suggestion. May I also call on the NEC to write to Keir Starmer and all Scottish Labour elected representatives to urge their consideration of our 100% public-owned energy policies and demand that any public energy company is based in Scotland's world energy capital. Conference, please support this motion and my suggestion with the unanimous enthusiasm you've given generously all our previous energy policies, because Alba's energy initiative delivers the Scottish energy independence our nation and our fellow citizens so desperately, desperately need. Thank you, brothers and sisters.
Thank you, David. I'd now like to invite our new by-election candidate, Debbie Ewan, to speak in favour of the motion, to be followed by Stuart McClintock, who will be our final speaker. Debbie Ewan, welcome.
Thank you, Conference. The creation of a Scottish public energy company has been endorsed by Conference before. As a party, we understand the importance of using Scotland's plentiful resources for the benefit of the people who live here. We know how assets can be sold out to the highest bidder, with little benefit for those living here. A publicly run energy company is the first step in Scotland taking control of our own resources and managing them for the benefit of the Scottish people. In 2017, the Scottish Government gave a commitment to the creation of a public energy company. This was a positive step and widely endorsed at the time. However, several years have passed with no progress, and the commitment seems indefinitely on the back burner. In the meantime, ordinary Scots become poorer, suffering from more chronic ill health, more stressed and uncertain with every week that passes. The most disadvantaged in our society, disproportionately impacted, and with extortionate energy costs impacting on people's lives. The Scottish Government has been timid in making the case of public ownership of energy. The UK Government is even worse, telling people time and again the price they pay for energy is something that's outside of their control. Is it any wonder the public believe we are powerless to secure cheaper fuel costs? Whilst we operate under a UK market so heavily dependent on international gas prices, energy-rich Scotland will continue to be blighted by fuel poverty. However, start to move away from that model and things can look very different indeed. Progressing with plans for a well-run public energy company will make the lives of Scots significantly better. More certainty on fuel availability, reduced costs, and no longer seeing out of those who can least afford it. Alba, along with other stakeholders, will continue to press the case and hold the Scottish Government to account. But it's also important for us to lead a positive campaign to expand public knowledge so that people can see for themselves what's happening here. How prices are hiked while Scotland's resources are squandered, how public ownership can drive lower prices, and how Scotland can harness its energy resources. With energy prices so high on the public agenda, we have the ideal platform to advance our case across the country. By impacting on public awareness, we'll foster wider debate and discussion outside of the political bubble, and by those people who really matter in all of this, the public. For so long, Scotland's energy policy has been determined by others. Let's empower the Scottish people to demand change by demonstrating how a public energy company can be run to improve lives. Thank you.
Thank you, Debbie. I now invite our final speaker, Stuart McClintock, who will speak in favour of the motion. Stuart will be our last speaker. And under expertise, Stuart's written lots electrician. Quite right, Stuart. Welcome.
Thank you very much. This is my first time, so be gentle to me. Right. I see this from a lot of different perspectives. Right. At the moment, it costs less than 5 pence to produce a unit of electricity on the wind turbine, yet we're paying 700% more. We should also own the national grid, right? And we can use planning as well. So that means that when new planning things go through the Scottish Parliament, which we happen to have control of, we can set a commission rate on the electricity that goes through it, so that even if it's a private company down in England taking the stuff, we can get a percentage of it. We can use the planning as well. We can also use, at the moment, if you drive by a wind farm, you'll see half of the wind turbine standing still because we're producing the electricity we need. We could do more. If we pay for the electricity of these turbines, even though they're standing still, I don't know if you know that, we could take that electricity, right, convert it to hydrogen, because apparently Scotland's got lots of water that falls from the sky, right? You lose 30% of the energy doing that, but we actually lose 100% of the cost at the moment anyway. We can store this hydrogen and use it to balance the grid, right? And that gives us green hydrogen as well. There's also a safety issue as well. I'm not naming companies here because it's not professional, right? But I'm an electrician, and a customer phoned me 2 days ago to say he had the smell of burning at his house. We'd done the fuse box, everything was okay. We phoned the energy supplier, and we phoned Energy Networks. Energy Networks came out no problem. The energy supplier, I'm not mentioning the name, the energy supplier that could sound like Hell Energy was in a foreign call centre, and they actually put me through to a company in Scotland that did the metering that sounds like a text message. And the guy put me through and he said, this woman's meter smelling burning. Can you send somebody out, please? Under the code of practice, for a response, the woman was like, you're not from the supplier. I can't talk to you. Goodbye, and hung up on me. This is the fragmented safety things we've got in this market. We need to get things right, and we need to make sure safety is first as well, because we can't have people's houses burning down because it's just not politically correct. Thank you very much.
Well done, Stuart McClintock. That was excellent. Now, there are no cards in against, so Robert, would you like to waive your right to sum up? I can't see you, Robert, where you are. Would you like to sum up, or are you happy to waive your right to sum up? You're happy to waive it. Thank you very much indeed, Robert. Can I ask then if the motion is passed by acclaim? Our final motion before we move to our discussion session is motion number 4, the CAS review implications for the Sandyford Clinic, to be proposed by Denise Finlay and seconded by Laura White. Welcome, Denise Finlay.
Hello, Conference. NHS England undertook a review of child gender services. This review was conducted by Dr. Hilary Cass. At the time, the Scottish Government was asked if they would conduct a similar review, as they had similar service in Scotland. The Scottish Government said they wouldn't conduct a similar review. However, they would take into account the findings of the Cass review. When Cass duly reported in March 2022, the Scottish Government decided not to take the findings into account because the findings didn't suit them. They didn't suit their gender ideology. The findings were quite damning. The protocols, Dr. Cass said the protocols followed were judged not safe, not a viable long-term option, and it was needed to be a fundamentally different model needed to be to the affirmation-only model that was being used. And so the Scottish Government have now said they're just disregarding the findings of the Cass report. And of course, we have a clinic here in Scotland, Sandyford, who is still using the same protocols and the same model, and our children are still being referred to it. The Scottish Government have a gender ideology in government and in our education that is quite dangerous to the children, the affirmation model. This will put children on puberty blockers, and the effects of things like puberty blockers are only now becoming known. Puberty blockers are irreversible, and they have an effect on bone density, height, and secondary sexual characteristics. And also there's some studies now into the effects of puberty blockers on brain development. So it's all worrying, and children shouldn't unnecessarily be put on puberty blockers. A study of Tavistock, the clinic in England, that was closed shortly after the Cass report, the gender services part of it, they found that the patients, this is children that were on puberty blockers, the vast majority went on to cross-sex hormones. And the resultant issues of cross-sex hormones of infertility, loss of sexual function, and many health issues, including cancers. This is a path that children are unnecessarily going on, and it's very detrimental. But extremely lucrative to the pharmaceutical companies, the medical companies, and many third sector jobs depend on it. So it's a lucrative industry for some people. The gender ideology pushes these 1950s regressive sex stereotypes onto our children. You're a Barbie girl or a G.I. Joe boy, and if you don't conform, well, maybe you're born wrong. That's what we're telling our children. The ideology sells children this lie, that their problems can be solved if they change their sex. And it's a double lie. First, their problems won't be solved if they change their sex. And second, no one can change sex. Sex is in every cell of your body. No one can change sex. And that is the truth. And we need to be telling children the truth. We should not be telling them that their problems can be solved by this lie. That their problems will be solved if they take drugs and they mutilate their bodies. This is cruel, and it's a scandal, and everybody involved in that industry should be very, very ashamed. There's a sad story of girls who have had double mastectomies, and they think if they stop taking hormones, their breasts will grow back. This is not informed consent. This is selling lies to impressionable children. Instead of lying to children, let's tell them the truth. Changing sex, even if you could, and you can't, it would never solve your problems. It wouldn't make you fit in. It wouldn't heal your trauma or your grief. If you're a girl, you can be a G.I. Joe. And if you're a boy, you can be a Barbie. That's the truth. Tell them the truth. And if you are same-sex attracted and you're a girl, you are a lesbian. And a woman will love you, and she will love your female body. So do not change your female body. And if you're a gay boy, there are men that love men, and they love male bodies. So your body is lovable, it's acceptable. There's no reason at all to change your body. We are asking the Scottish Government to pause referrals to the Sandiford and to undertake a review of child gender services in Scotland, not based on ideology, and to take ideology out of schools. And we're asking them to tell the truth to children. There is no mistake. You are not wrong. Who you are who you're meant to be, and you are perfect, and you are beautiful, and that's the truth. Thank you. Please sit.
Can I now call Laura White to second the motion, and Laura will be our final speaker. Welcome, Laura. Where are you? Oh, sorry. Laura, are you here? Okay, I can't see Laura. Denise, I don't know if you know where your seconder is. It's perfectly in order to ask if I can take a seconder from the floor to that extremely important motion. Do I have one? I'm sure I'll have plenty. Thank you very much indeed, men and women. Can I ask if the motion be passed by acclaim? Now, just before we move to our final session, just a few announcements. Can I ask you, first of all, to thank Josh Robertson for bringing the Gaelic language motions here. It's really important. And I'm now going to invite Solicitor Advocate Gordon Dangerfield and Martin Keatings to make their way to the stage as we rearrange it for our discussion session to be chaired by Kenny McCaskill. And while that is happening, just a couple of announcements in relation to the fringes. At 12:45 in this hall, there'll be a political information event, members only, on our Alba Canvas training system. And upstairs in the lesser hall there'll be the Equalities Forum, and also at 1 o'clock at the Smith Art Gallery Museum there'll be a fringe on the environment, so plenty happening in that period of time. And as the live streamers will know, our live stream will cut at the time of lunch and our fringes. But now I'm going to ask our panel to exit, and apart from those who are in the panel, and we'll organise the stage for the next session. Thank you very much indeed, conference. Thank you.
giving us a signal?
Just whenever you're ready, Kenny. Just get people to quieten down.
Sorry? We're good to go, yeah?
You do. Delegates, can I ask you all to kindly take your seats, and we'll close the doors at the back. I'm going to hand over a chair to Kenny to give me a bit of a rest, but also to let you know that during the session there's an opportunity for questions and hopefully answers. And there is a roving mic, so please feel free to raise your hand. Can we just close the doors at the back? Thank you very much indeed. Some nice person up there doing that. Super, just give you a second to take your seats, everybody. And I will pass over to Kenny McCaskill.
Well, thank you and good afternoon. It is now. I'm obviously joined by Tasmina, but I'm also glad to be joined both by Martin Keatings, who many of you will know for his court action that many of us supported, and indeed both financially and morally, and also by Gordon Dangerfield, who is Solicitor Advocate, many of whom you will be aware have been following his blogs in a variety of matters. And who I remember as a doughty campaigner going all the way back to the poll tax. So without further ado, we're here to have a discussion on the Supreme Court that was in the news earlier. Perhaps you could start by asking yourself, Martin, given that you tried to proceed with the court action initially, what was your view of what happened and your reflections perhaps on how you were treated?
I wasn't there, and if I was, I didn't do it. The last 72 hours now, my perception in general has been, déjà vu. Well, that seems rather watered down in terms of the arguments that are being made in the court. In terms of the way that I was treated with regards to the initial case, it wasn't me. It wasn't me that was treated that way. It was 11,000 members of the Yes movement. I just happened to be the person that was named on the court summons. That's it. As simple as that. And obviously dealt with the administration. But when it came down to it, it was, for all intents and purposes, an exercise of 11,000 members of the electorate exercising their sovereignty. Now, the word sovereignty literally means where power lies. So they were going to their court in their country to ask a question about whether or not they had the right for a referendum to be legislated for in their country with respect to their future. And the court turned around and said, sorry, we can't actually, it's hypothetical, it's academic. The only reason it was hypothetical and academic wasn't because of the UK government, it was because, unfortunately, the Lord Advocate, who still never clarified whether he was representing the Scottish Government or whether he was representing the Scottish Parliament, although that seems to be quite deliberate. In terms of the SNP subsequently withdrawing, that simply came across as they were trying to make it look like they weren't involved anymore. But there's one line that always sticks in my head, and it was, it's not for the pursuer to stand in the shoes of parliamentarians. There's two things I would say to that. The first one is, clown shoes don't fit me. Sorry, Kenny. And the second thing is, in Scotland, yes, it is. The people are sovereign in Scotland, not the politicians. An English politician goes to Westminster, he can do whatever he wants. He is able to exercise his own viewpoint. Whereas when you and Neil go to Westminster, because the people are sovereign, you are simply acting as agents for the will of the Scottish people. So yes, it very much is for the people of Scotland to stand in the shoes of parliamentarians, and it's for parliamentarians to respect the viewpoint of the people that they're supposed to be representing. And that, to bring it right back to your original question, is what was such a kick in the teeth. I was sitting there thinking, this is the Scottish Government representing the Scottish people denying the right to ask a question on their own constitutional future. Why? Just so they can argue exactly the same points again at the Supreme Court. In an English court, to ask and beg for permission to have on something that's to have a vote on something, to have a vote, which is a fundamental right for the Scottish people.
Can I ask, were you approached extrajudicially at all by lawyers on behalf of the Scottish Government or the SNP for discussion, or did it all go through agents?
No, it was everything went, it was actually worked the opposite direction. When we initiated the case in the first place, I made it very clear to Council, this has to be cooperative. It can't just be ploughing on headlong and having no conversation about it. And as you'll recall, because you were one of the individuals that actually put an affidavit in support of the people's right to ask the question, the primary instruction I gave to Council was to reach out to the Scottish Government, to reach out to the Scottish Parliament, to reach out to members of Parliament, and keep them informed. And we did the whole way through. So, but we soon realised that was very much a one-sided communication. We were giving everything to them, and they were sort of... and then, obviously, the SNP... I have to make it clear, SNP, Scottish Government, big difference, no difference, couldn't really tell which one the Lord Advocate was working for, Scottish Parliament, SNP. But the long and the short of it comes down to that we were communicating one direction. What we were trying to do is align things. We were basically exercising sovereignty of the people, to ask the question, get an answer on that question, hand the SNP a shotgun, and the SNP turned it on their own toes. And I thought, I'm pretty sure I saw this in an episode of The Twilight Zone. And then, of course, we find ourselves right back at the Supreme Court again, and it's exactly the same situation again. Same questions, same answers, a few references to my surname. In this case, was it in a large number of arguments, with the UK government taking exactly the same stance. It's hypothetical, it's academic. The only difference is it's the UK government actually arguing at this time, not sitting back and going, you've got it, Lord Advocate, on you go. So, yeah.
Well, Gordon, sorry, can I ask, when you heard of the Lord Advocate's wheeze about the reference, what was your take given what you'd seen before?
Well, it's an absolutely extraordinary thing for the Lord Advocate of the Scottish Government to somehow find herself in a position where she cannot support the principal policy recommendation of her own government. How does that situation possibly come about? And of course, Nicola presented it as this great wheeze that she had come up with. Look, we can go directly to the Supreme Court under this obscure part of the Scotland Act. How clever are we? But it isn't that. It's how, when you are the First Minister of Scotland and the Ministers of Scotland appointing a Lord Advocate, and you have a situation in which you have very respectable academic and legal opinion on one side, your side of the debate on whether there should be, whether it's within competence to have a Scottish referendum, and to be fair, very respectable academic and legal opinion on the other side, saying it's not within competence. And you are choosing a Lord Advocate. You choose a Lord Advocate that's on your respectable legal and academic side of the debate. I honestly don't know if it's complete incompetence or complete bad faith or a mixture of the two. It's one or the other or a mixture of the two, because nobody who is seriously interested in a referendum on Scottish independence appoints a Lord Advocate who's a unionist and who doesn't believe in those arguments. And I have to say this about the Lord Advocate. How do you take that position? If that position is offered to you as a senior lawyer, and you know that the main plank of the government's policy that's looking to appoint you is independence and having a referendum, it's been announced enough times, isn't there some obligation on you to say, well, thanks very much, First Minister, but you do know that I don't have any confidence in your main legislative programme. How does that happen? I'm genuinely curious. I wasn't obviously party to the conversation, none of us were. But it must have been an extraordinary conversation. So that's the main thing that's come out of it, following on from what Martin says about how his action was effectively sabotaged by the Scottish Government. The Scottish Government sabotaged itself from the get-go by appointing this Lord Advocate.
The SNP made a great play about being successful and being able to lodge their own written pleadings in the Supreme Court. You, like I, were a solicitor. I have to say, I go back, my experience, it was still the House of Lords. It was practice, it shows my age. But can you tell me your views about whether that was a great claim for success? Because I didn't hear much mention of the SNP's written pleadings. I didn't hear Lord Reid referencing them, or indeed I don't even know if the Lord Advocate spoke to them, but perhaps you could tell us what actually they claimed to have done and what it actually in reality was.
Well, can I just say that I found the whole case incredibly depressing and for the people of Scotland demeaning. It seemed like the sovereignty of the people of Scotland was on trial in the Supreme Court in London for no reason whatsoever. We charged this, or the electorate charged the SNP Green Coalition government with delivering an independence referendum, not going cap in hand down the road again to ask for permission to do something they'd already been instructed to do by the people of Scotland. And if you are going to go to the Supreme Court, let the UK government in their disarray come after you. Don't hand it on a plate to them. Hold the referendum, win the vote and let them challenge you. In terms of the written pleadings by the SNP, they were good, although they omitted mention of some key players in the independence campaigning for decades. They weren't spoken to. Therefore, they were pointless. OK, so the court couldn't hear those pleadings. They said they would read them. Fine, let's anticipate the lordships and ladyships will do so. But where was the SNP in the press arena on that day? Where were they speaking to the press about, this is our case, this is what we're seeking to argue, we can't say this in the court, but we're going to say it in the press? I accompanied Alex to a Foreign Press Association event where he spoke to 26 members of the international press about the SNP case. Where were they? So, if you are going to ask for a judgment on an issue, at least take control of how that case is presented, if not in court, then externally. And there were two phrases, which is the only reason I've got my iPad here, that I want to refer to, which bothered me the most. The Lord Advocate, who I like, talked about this matter requiring to be finally resolved. The sovereignty of the people of Scotland is not something to be finally resolved, nor is it, as she referred to, a festering issue. It's our right of self-determination, and if they can't find a way of exercising it, the people in this hall will.
Gordon, where do you think the likely outcome will put the legal position from a lawyer's perspective? Where are we likely to stand legally?
Well, either way, it doesn't really take us very far forward. I certainly had the impression from the judges that they weren't buying the UK government's argument that prevailed in Martin's action of this is all very hypothetical and we don't have a completed bill and so we're not going to decide on it. It looked pretty clear to me that they're keen to decide it. As to which way they decide it, who knows? But if they do decide in favour of a referendum being within competence, it will be the narrowest possible referendum you can imagine, because that's the case the Lord Advocate put. The Lord Advocate said, well, you see, this isn't really anything to do with reserved powers, because we're just asking the people a wee question, and we're just quite interested in what the answer might be, and please, going to let us have the referendum, because that's all it is. We're not really impinging on anything in the real centre of power down in Westminster. That was the argument that was put forward in order for us to win. So if we do win, that's all we'll have won. As a lawyer, I'm not a progressive lawyer. I'm a socialist lawyer. And I believe that where we use the law, we only use it as a tool for a much wider political campaign. And sometimes people forget that, and we get sidetracked down a legal route, which we're not going to win, which should only be at the very most an addendum to proper political campaigning, which is what all of you people here are committed to, and that's the important fight. So if we do happen to get a decision from the Supreme Court, then the fight is absolutely on to say, well, we don't care what the Lord Advocate said. We don't care what assurances were given to the Supreme Court about what this means. We are going to make this the means of gaining our independence. That's what the referendum's really going to be about. And the Supreme Court can just sit on the sidelines and watch. So if, on the other hand, we get the other result, then it's obvious to everybody where we are. The Scottish Government has scuppered any chance of a referendum by taking this extraordinary legal route.
I'm going to invite people. There's a mic here that we'll be able to pass round if anybody's got a particular question for any of the panellists. But whilst we're looking round, perhaps, I mean, Gordon, it would be fair to say, without giving away names, I know many senior lawyers who took a different view from the Lord Advocate about the ability of the Scottish Parliament to at least discuss the legislation. Would that be something, again, we don't need to have names, but I mean, there seems to be something put forward, at least by the BBC, that the Lord Advocate is the supreme source of all legal knowledge, and the Scottish Parliament just couldn't have legislated on a referendum bill, which is not something that I, to say, personally know many very senior lawyers think differently. And I'll bring Martin and Taz in after. Jenny?
Well, one of the ironies of the Lord Advocate's submission was that she actually had a detailed footnote to her submission, which actually named names on both sides of the debate, including some very prestigious people on the side that said that it's within competence of the Scottish Government to have a referendum. So there certainly is. If you're asking about the point that came out in the Supreme Court, which was that regardless of what the Lord Advocate thinks, the statutory position is that a minister in good faith who believed that the bill was in competence could bring it forward, regardless of the Lord Advocate's position. Well, that, in my opinion, would remain the position after the Supreme Court comes back with its judgment. You would have to say, I disagree in good faith with what the Supreme Court said. I distinguish it on this, that, and the other ground, and I'm going to bring it forward. As long as we have this Lord Advocate, you would have a problem, because the Ministerial Code, which was very much dismissed by the Supreme Court, but I actually think the Ministerial Code is important. And the Ministerial Code says if the Lord Advocate won't sign the statement, the minister can't bring it forward. So it's a mess. Effectively, it's a mess.
Martin, would you want to, any reflections from your own experience with, I presume, a past Lord Advocate, but representing the same
different Lord Advocate, same day. Let's be clear about several things. Firstly, the Scotland Act provisions for bringing forward a bill stipulate that it requires the permission, so it requires signing effectively by only 2 people, or signed off by 2 people, to confirm that it's within the competency of the Scottish Parliament. The first one is the MSP bringing it forward, and the second one is the presiding officer. With those 2, it's then able to be put forward in the Scottish Parliament. It's then up to Westminster to challenge that in the Supreme Court because it becomes a devolution issue. The Lord Advocate doesn't have a veto on legislation in the Scottish Parliament. So the situation with the second thing I want to make clear just before I continue is that the question is not, can Scotland have a referendum? The question is, can the Scottish Parliament legislate for a referendum? And that's really important because there's a difference between actually having a referendum and creating the legislation in order to create that franchise to have it. And one of the things that we found back in 2019 with this particular question is the reason it was deemed hypothetical and academic had nothing to do with the fact that a bill wasn't going through or anything like that. It was the fact that the Scottish National Party had not published the bill. That was the primary reason why the court threw it out. We were able to establish a lot of other stuff, which was great because this time round it allowed everybody to know a good number of questions. But the reason that case didn't go ahead was purely because the SNP didn't publish the bill. They could have very well gone back to the Scottish courts this time, having published the bill. It says, now we've published it, now it's not academic, it's not hypothetical, and have the Scottish Court of Session rule on it, not the Supreme Court. Wrong court. Or option 2 is to put the bill forward, have an MSP sign it off, have the presiding officer sign it off, and then wait for Westminster to challenge it, go moan then, and then take it to the Supreme Court that way. That's the 2 things. But the way we looked at it back at the original case was, if they prepared the bill, we would get a declarator from the Court of Session. The Court of Session would turn around and say, yes, it's okay to pass this bill. The SNP immediately pass it with an activation clause in it that doesn't tie them into calling the referendum immediately, but it does pass the bill immediately with an activation clause that says, say, a majority vote of the Scottish Parliament makes the terms of this bill, brings it into fruition. And that would have protected it under devolved legislation, because once it's legislated for, that's it. It's devolved to Scotland. And then at that point, the UK government couldn't have challenged it because the court said it can't be challenged. And if they had tried to pass any legislation at Westminster to undermine the terms of the bill, which is exactly what happened with the Continuity Bill, then it would be the boot on the other foot. It would be the Scottish government could then turn around and say, hey, no. You're now going to have to defend your position, not the other way around. So the way they've done this is completely cockeyed. It's watered down. And I am both optimistic and pessimistic at the same time. So my brain's kind of split in 2. But this is either going to go one of 2 ways. The first way is that the court's going to come back and say it's okay to legislate for it. The bill's going to get booted through immediately. It's going to be happy. But on that statement you made about it being a very narrow referendum, well, that doesn't really matter because the referendum only needs to be this. Should Scotland be an independent country? That's a narrow definition, that's all you need. Or it's going to go the other way. And the other way is that the court's going to turn around and say, sorry, Scottish Parliament can't legislate for that. And if that happens, then that is the Supreme Court in England, in Westminster, effectively saying that the Scottish people are not sovereign. And at that point, I'm sorry, and I've held my tongue for long enough, there's only one way to say it, we're just going to have to take direct action in terms of striking and causing havoc. And the time to turn around and say, pretty please give me a referendum, those days are over. It's no, you work for us, we're sovereign, we're having a referendum, if you don't like it, tough. And the long and the short of it is we can't have a second vote on independence, but you can have 5 new leaders. You can vote on that. No, that's right. Democracy is the right not just to choose, but the right to change one's mind And as simple as that. So as I see it, we're either going to be going to a referendum or, well, we're going to have to flood the streets and go on strike. Simple as that.
Right, let me open it up.
Hello, yeah, it is on, I think. Can you hear me?
Yes, can you tell us?
I can hold it and I can speak into it, but I don't know about anything else to do with it, switching it on and all that. It's on already. My question is addressed to Gordon, who I've read quite a bit of your stuff, you know, online, and some of the things you have, you know, openly accused the Crown Office and the government of have never been challenged by them. So they've never taken you to court for things you've said. So I take that as being, you know, they know they're wrong.
Don't tempt them.
The thing is that I think this, from what I've heard on, you know, the debates and what you guys have said, I think that the current Scottish, the SNP, Scottish government, needs to be brought down, quite honestly. And I know it's a dirty business, it takes time and everything, but how long is it going to take for our party to replace them, you know, in various elections coming up? I think they need to be brought down. And the other issue that they're using the independence argument, although they're doing it very badly, but they're using it as a way of getting this GRA reform thing through as well. If you want to vote for independence, you've got to vote for us. The saying, you know, one carrot after another, I know, but the thing is that if you vote for the SNP, you're also voting for the
Is it
GRA
a question on the
reform.
Supreme Court case? Because, you know,
we
will be having our discussions on all these issues.
Well, all right, my question is, I've already mentioned it. The only way I can think of bringing the government down now is to expose what's been going on, you know, regarding the appalling attempt to ruin Alex Salmond and this GRA reform business. If that goes through, which it's supposed to go through, how do we bring them down? Is there any chance that we can bring them down by, for instance, Alex's legal team announced some months ago that they were applying for a permission.
Sorry, I mean, Gordon and Martin and Taz are here to discuss, you know, the Supreme Court. There are a whole lot of issues. You know, I was involved in Alex's defence as well, not in the legal capacity.
Is there any chance of bringing them down quicker than by the usual route of winning one election after another?
Well, I think we're getting into a debate that should be, you know, for the conference floor later. Are there other questions? There's somebody with their hand at the back.
Hello, my name's Sally. I'm a sovereign Scot. Would you think that in terms of the options, and you said there was two likely outcomes, is there a third option where they'll kick it into the long grass in Westminster's interests, where they'll just say on the back of Keaton's result that it's too hypothetical, therefore we can't judge, and then the whole thing will be left lying in the long grass, and Nicola will say, oh, well, we'll have to ponder on this, and it will just take all the steam out of the yes movement. And secondly, wasn't it a huge missed opportunity where a high-profile court case of such a nature like this, a constitutional issue, grabs the attention of the world stage, and instead of having someone passionately arguing and eloquently arguing the case, we had a piss-poor effort by an advocate who couldn't look up from her notes and stumbled and mumbled and clearly didn't have her heart in the right place, never mind her professional head in the right place.
The way that they could kick it into the long grass, as you say, is by doing what they did with Martin's case and saying it's all very hypothetical. which is what the government, the UK government, spent most of their time arguing. I mean, devoted almost all of their time to that issue. My feeling from watching the judges was that that's not what they're going to do. My feeling was that they were very much taken with the idea of, well, what happens if the Scottish Government does have a law officer that's not sure? We've got this unique route. I mean, there's no other way of getting directly to the Supreme Court. It's a very, very unusual thing in law to be able to do, even for a government. So I think they were I had the impression they were quite taken with the idea of let's use this rather unique. So I think they will decide it, in other words. That's my opinion. I think they will decide it. And we will have a decision one way or the other. And if I can just comment on your point, it is related. I do believe myself that the reason this Lord Advocate was appointed was because Nicola Sturgeon does not care about independence, but she cares about reforming the GRA, she cares about trampling on women's rights, and she cares about being progressive and going down in history. And that's why we've got a Lord Advocate who won't have confidence in an independence referendum. It's all related.
Right. Yep. Yes, the gentleman who's got the mic.
Go back to when Charles, the King of UK now, he reiterated the fact that what his mother had already done, as in being saying about the claim of right and the sovereignty of the people of Scotland. So why is any political party not emphasising that to, whether it be in the courts, whether it be to the people, you know, because a lot of the people are, and excuse the French, ignorant, you know, when it comes to how they are in their own country. And the other part, what Martin says about strikes and so on, if it goes against us, and hopefully it won't, why don't we declare UDI?
Martin, do you want to comment?
Okay, I'll start from the front. The way we fix the legal system is independence, because all those institutions come down to basically the royal tiers, effectively. So the way we fix it is independence. Period. Is that. In terms of this is actually a harder question. UDI. I'll start with UDI. Only in the history of UDI, I think there's only something like 3 or 4 countries have been formally recognised on the international stage. International recognition is really, really important in terms of a country's success when they become independent. It's not just a case of international recognition, it's also a case of conflict. For a country to declare UDI and be recognised and it not be part of some sort of conflict is a very, very rare thing. So that's really not a route we want to go down. What we want to do is we want to show the international community that we've done everything within our power, within the system of the United Kingdom, in order to gain our independence, which that's the point we're at now, by the way. And then we look at extra legal options that Westminster doesn't agree with, the Supreme Court doesn't agree with, and then we use the international courts and we use other methodologies outside of the United Kingdom in order to be able to exercise our fundamental rights. But the easiest way, of course, is just to grind the entire country to a halt and face off against Westminster. It's probably the most accelerated option, and just say, come on then. Force them into a position whereby they have to agree terms for a referendum that's legally binding.
A few points to address here. First of all, wrong case, wrong court. We all agree on that. Second of all, let's take this further. Let's give the benefit of the doubt. Let's imagine that the Supreme Court says, yes, go ahead and have your referendum. We're going to campaign out on the doorsteps and tell people we really need them to come out and vote. Whilst at the same time, they're going to hear that their vote doesn't matter, because that's the case that was made. There's no legal effect. You vote, so please come out and vote, but actually, it's not going to have any legal effect. I simply cannot understand why the SNP Green Coalition are giving up on the Section 30 route, just putting it to the side, letting all the rest of us try and find a way around it. To be quite frank, the current Tory government are certifiably incapable of making a decision on anything. So if they were to refuse a Section 30 order, we would be in order to say they've lost their minds. Of course we should be having a Section 30 order. And one more point. If the Tories are so detestable, if their policies are so dreadful, why did the Scottish Government, the SNP Government, the SNP Party, not support our attempts at a supermajority in the Scottish Parliament to get rid of the Tories? And why did they not reciprocate when we asked for their support in the Scottish Council elections to ensure that every one of those councils that were required to run an election on our sovereignty would have our people in them too? It defies belief, and it only speaks to the fact that they don't want a referendum. Well, we do, and every single, as far as I can remember, Kenny will remember further back than I am, as he's quite nicely said, SNP leader that we ever had has advanced the cause of Scottish independence, advanced the cause of Scottish sovereignty, and given people a power to take their future in their own hands. And for the first time in my life, it feels like we have taken a big step back. When the people of Scotland, some of who are watching this, who can't afford to heat or eat, need Scotland to be taken forward. Shame on those who've taken us down this road.
I'm conscious of time because it's now 22 and we do have events going on in here during lunchtime, so we'll require for that. The only further final comment, because I'm very grateful to Gordon and to Martin for coming such a long way and giving up their own time. The only point I would make follows on to the comment about UDA. You're required to have three things. You're required to have the historical basis, which is the claim of right. You're required to act legally and democratically, but you require to have political power. And that is why we're a political party, because we require to obtain political power at local authority and indeed at national level. And let me give the example. It's why we need to have a Scottish Constitutional Convention. I could leave conference tomorrow and I could drive past Tullyallen and I could go in and see Ian Livingston, who I know very well, and say, Ian, conference says we've declared UDI. You're no longer to take instructions from the Home Secretary on matters that are reserved. You're to come to us. No, Ian, and he would say, Kenny, no. Just no. But look, historically, in the United States, the Dáil Éireann, you have a constitutional convention that says we are the democratically elected people of our country. Then what you find is that the institutions of power, the Chief Constable, the chairs of the health board, all these people who previously said, well, we look to political authority and we follow that. At the present moment, they follow the diktat of the Scottish Government. But if the Scottish Government won't change, then the Scottish Constitutional Convention can make sure that we say we are the people based on our historic rights, based on a legal and democratic framework. That's how you deliver what you want. But thanks to all those who have come, and there'll be other events in this chamber.